The jury isn't out regarding how harmful processing is, and it seems to be a very complex issue because you can have unhealthy raw food, and you can have possibly you can have healthy dry or like processed food. It has a lot to do with what it actually is made of. If you have, say, diseased animal that is, used for raw food, it potentially could be more harmful than food that's processed, but the original raw materials is of higher quality. Yeah. So those types of questions are really difficult. And when you're talking about processing, I think that it can be more important to look at the macronutrient profile than it is the actual processing steps. And what's interesting, if you look at the market for pet food at the moment, these two approaches seem to correlate quite well. If you look at unprocessed food, the macronutrient profile is going to be radically different than processed food. The processed food is going to contain, for sure, way more carbohydrate than the unprocessed food. With the Venn diagram doesn't have much overlap, put it that way.
Yeah, I saw that in the pet food store.
Yeah, so although I wouldn't be able to say that the ultra-processed or processed are in itself, the processing is what's causing problems, it is very important to note that, some raw materials and ingredients are much more heavily associated with one diet than the other. So with that being said, I would look at what the macronutrient profile of a dog, like what a healthy dog seems to enjoy, and then I would base my diet choice on that.
Okay. So I should just feed my dog a lot of processed grains.
Well, it seems that a dog has it seems that a dog has an innate ability to recognize what types of foods it prefers. There's actually been some studies that look at comparing what does a dog prefer if they're able to be fed ad libitum many different types of diets, or a few different types of diets. And it seems that the macronutrient profile that a dog prefers is surprising. It's about the same as what a wolf prefers. So if you look, there's a few studies that have been looking at it. One of ours we've been in contact with a research group out of the University of Massey in New Zealand, and Mark Roberts performed a study that was published a couple of years ago looking at what the dog prefers if they're able to eat whatever they want, and saw that carbs not on the menu.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, they sniff the carbs often first, but then few of them ever even touch it or
if they have something else.
Yeah. So there was a video camera recording the behavior of how the dogs approach the foods, and then how they go about selecting which one to eat. And it seemed that there was one that was very heavy in carbs, and then there was one that was very heavy in protein, and then there was one that was very heavy in fat. And so it seemed that the dog would first go for fat, and then as time progressed, it would start balancing about a 50-50 ratio in weight of fat and protein.
Yeah, which means most of the calories in fat.
Exactly. So most of the calories would be coming from fat, and it actually was shown that it's been repeated now in 3 different studies that if you give a dog a chance to ad libitum eat different diets, in the first few days of the study, it will preferentially go for the fat and then go to the protein, but then over time, it'll go to preferring fat and protein. And also, the amount of calories that it consumes, it decreases over time. So it has an ability to control its satiety signals. And so it doesn't just overeat.
I think that same often happens with humans also. Yeah. Of course, I'm not telling people to eat a lot of junk fat, but if they eat as much really good fats as they want, then over time it goes down.
Yeah.
Balances itself out or something like that.
Yeah, there's actually some signaling pathways that are very important to the brain being told that the body is actually full, that are compromised if, if you talk about insulin resistance and blood glucose levels from having a higher carbohydrate diet, it seems that the body's innate ability to recognize when it's full might be compromised. So there's that as well.
What about, let's say I put different sorts of food out there for my dog. Can I skew their selection by putting a lot of addictive chemicals, like addictive maybe aromas in the carb food?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. There's two issues that actually come up with this, and that's how important it is for early life exposure of diet. For example, if a dog has been taught to eat a certain way right after weaning, it can prefer a certain type of food simply because ever since it was a very small puppy, it learned that this is what it has to eat, or this is what it learns to eat. So actually it can learn over time that this is what tastes good. And another thing is, exactly that, pet food manufacturers that are making these carb-based diets know that a dog loves meat. So they actually add a lot of chemicals into the dog food that resembles meat. And it is difficult to say how effective that is because, what does the dog... I haven't seen a study looking at raw food and then kibble that is supposed to imitate it is supposed to imitate like the smell coming from raw food. So I'm not able to say, but I think that would be a really interesting study.
I think very interesting and revealing here is that if you talk about human junk food, like for example candy, then the industry will add, for example, artificial berry aromas. So that tells us that maybe we have a thing for berries, and then the industry for animals or for dogs, they add meat aromas. So that's a telltale sign.
Yeah. Also. I was actually just, it's interesting that you say that because I was just rereading an article called The Evolutionary Basis for Animal Feeding, which was sponsored by a very large dry kibble food manufacturer. Okay. And there they were saying that, they said that, the dog has a sweetness receptor in its tongue. Okay. So it can definitely get on board and recognize and even like sweet flavors. But then they also argued that this is a reason why it's perfectly okay to add in carbohydrate into the diet. But at the same time, you wonder, because in the same article they argued that this is likely the existence of the sweetness receptor is from the time of wolves, because wolves also have this sweetness receptor, and this is so that they can recognize the sugar in muscle tissue. It's actually specifically a sweetness receptor that recognizes the sugars that can be found in muscle and liver stores. So it would indicate that that the pet food or the kibble food manufacturers are aware that a dog definitely prefers specifically meat, but they also believe that the flavor is more important than the actual nutritional value.